Who let the dogs out? Who? 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 So all domesticated dogs are descended from wolves. The binomial name for a domestic dog is Canis lupus familiaris, which would basically translate to a wolf that we are familiar with. So I think we can all agree that dogs are probably the animal that people like the most. If you had to ask the majority of people what their favourite animal was, if you weren't just including wild animals, most people would probably say dogs. And they're the animals that we come into contact with the most, and they're one of the ones that we've had the most to do with historically. So where did the relationship between humans and dogs come about? So it probably has origins in our hunter-gatherer past, where we basically competed with wolves for food. And no doubt when we made kills, wolves would hang around and scavenge from us, and we would probably do the same to them. So we probably came into contact with them a lot. I think there's some romanticism, people thinking that we maybe banded together to hunt prey. That probably didn't happen, but there no doubt was a familiarity there. And there no doubt would have been wolves that weren't quite as aggressive, and that we would have tolerated a lot more. When we started to form settlements, wolves would still have hung around, and wolves today still hang around settlements and do scavenging, sometimes do take livestock. So that no doubt did happen, but we probably did find a use for them. Attackers or any negative to any attackers or other to any. And as time went on, we probably started taking their cubs as well, and the cubs that grew up to become less aggressive, more submissive, we would have bred with other wolves that would have been the same. That would have begun the selective breeding process that we started with the wolves, and which led to the domesticated dog. So we've been breeding dogs for thousands of years. They're probably one of the first animals that we did domesticate, and they're actually the one that we've domesticated into the most interesting variety of shapes and sizes. And a lot of them don't look like each other. Like a St. Bernard looks nothing like a Chihuahua, and a Labrador looks nothing like a pug. Every other animal we've domesticated kind of still looks like the basic shape. All cattle kind of look similar, all cats kind of look similar, all chickens kind of look similar to a degree. Dogs, they all look pretty widely different, and because they're all the same species, they could in theory breed with one another. However, on a physical level, a lot of them can't. Like a Great Dane and a Chihuahua, there's no way they're going to be able to breed. If somehow a Great Dane was to impregnate a Chihuahua, that animal would die. It would not be able to carry its young to term. So we've almost put blockers on how certain members of the same species can reproduce. It's quite interesting. We haven't really done that with any other animal. It's at least not to that degree. And as we've continued to breed dogs for thousands of years, we've found various uses for them. A lot of them are still used for those original things. Things like guard dogs, German Shepherds, Dobermans have always been used for that purpose. And as I talked about with hunting, a lot of dogs were used for hunting, for a variety of hunting. Things like Basset Hounds, Beagles were used for hunting. Labradors, Spaniels were used for retrieving game. Things like terriers would be used for pest control, like catching rats. And we've even bred some dogs just to look a certain way because we just like them. Things like Chihuahuas don't really serve much of a purpose, but we like them to be small and to fit into little bags. And pugs as well. Pugs basically functioned as hot water bottles in ancient China. And again, they don't look anything like a wild wolf. In fact, a lot of dogs like that, like pugs, bulldogs, have pretty bad respiratory problems. Because they've been bred to have really short faces, it's not good for them. There is maybe a welfare concern in breeding certain dogs a certain way. There's other cases of, Alsatians that have, spinal problems. Certain types like dachshunds have been bred to be so low to the ground that they have impediments as well. So there is definitely an element of that. And we've bred dogs for so long, ultimately, because we like them. Why do we like them? So wolves, like us, are social animals. They live in a kind of linear dominance hierarchy, whereby there's dominant animals in the top and everything below is submissive. But there's a level of who's dominant and submissive to who. We live in a much more fluid society, whereby individuals can be dominant to each other, but just because someone's submissive to you doesn't mean that they can't be dominant to someone else. But that perception of dominance and submissiveness is often interpreted as loyalty, and I think the wolf pack mentality is something we do admire. Ultimately, in wolf society, if one animal is submissive to another, it displays quite a lot of what you would perceive as affection. It would roll on its back. Things like that we tend to like about dogs, we perceive as loyalty. And as we took dogs that were submissive, they tended to submit themselves to us. They acted affectionate. Dogs do, seem to be very loyal to us. Ultimately, a dog, more than any other sort of domestic pet that we have, will stay by your side. And we actually like having them around because they're just comforting animals. I mean, dogs are probably the most common therapy. They are actually good for a lot of people's mental health. A lot of people would agree that having a dog around is a good thing, especially if you've got a family. And that's kind of represented in the sort of fictional dogs we have. Dogs almost always appear as, the kind of faithful companion. You look at Toto in The Wizard of Oz, Snowy and Tintin, there's loads of examples. Actually, if we're being really pretentious, in Homer's The Odyssey, when Odysseus returns to Ithaca after being away for 20 years, his dog is the only one that recognises him. That whole perception of the dog as the loyal companion to man, like man's best friend, that's where that whole thing comes from, is something that's been around for a long, long time. I mean, dogs have been in our history for thousands of years, and that perception's never really changed. The relationship between humans and dogs in the developing world is a bit different. You don't tend to find as many dogs that are owned by individual people or families. You tend to find a lot more that are kind of community owned, I guess. Most dogs in the developing world are feral. In fact, feral dogs make up most of the world's dog population, and some of those dogs are, a threat to people. Dogs actually kill more humans than any other large animal, with the exception of humans. That's an interesting thing that people tend not to think of, and dogs ultimately can be bad vectors for various diseases, like rabies, stuff like that. I recently read about one of the first things that were found when Pompeii was discovered was a sign that basically said, beware of dogs. We obviously knew that that dogs are a potential threat. I mean, ultimately, they are still wolves, and we definitely see wolves as a threat. But ultimately, yeah, dogs today have kind of been welcomed into our homes more than ever before. Something I didn't really realise was that dogs in the house wasn't really a thing until like not even 100 years ago, like really after the Second World War. And you kind of see the side effects of that. Certain breeds that would cause allergies, dogs with kind of shaggy hair, aren't really as common nowadays. You don't tend to see as many of them. And actually, you see a lot more dogs that have kind of woolly hair. Things like poodles are actually dogs that have been bred with poodles, like, labradoodles, cockapoos, dogs that don't really shed hair as much, that don't cause as much of an allergic reaction. That's an interesting thought. I hadn't really realised that until recently, to be honest. And it's almost a taboo to say you don't like dogs. If you say you don't like dogs, or you're maybe not that much of a dog person, people tend to look at you funny. If someone says they hate dogs, there is definitely like an air of, what the fuck is wrong with that guy? More than any other animal, you can kind of hate any other animal, but if you hate dogs, you're kind of setting yourself up to be ostracised to an extent. The loyalty we feel the dogs have for us is kind of a two-way street in that sense. I mean, my opinion of dogs, I like dogs. I do think they're a little bit overrated, but it's not so much the dogs themselves, it's more the people that lose their shit every time they see a dog. I do get a little bit annoyed about that. People that can't walk past a dog without saying hello to it. I'm like, okay, come on, we've got somewhere to be. I remember being in South Africa years ago, and everyone lost it when they saw a guy with a Labrador. Everyone was shouting, "Oh my god, look at that!" And I was like, "There's a giraffe over there, guys." Like, we don't get those at home. Just to summarise, dogs are the animal that we like the most. They're the one that we've had probably the longest history with, that we can identify with most, whether that be a romanticism or some truth in it. I mean, there is some truth in it. And they're the ones that we pretty much see every day. And they are the most abundant, large carnivore in the world. And considering we generally hate wolves, that is no mean feat. Let me know in the comments below what you think of dogs. I thought I'd try something a bit different. I thought this could be an interesting thing to do. I was certainly found reading up on stuff in preparation quite interesting. And I would probably do more of these. I don't know how often I would do them. Maybe, once every now and again, I don't know. And if you've got any recommendations for any animals you'd like me to do a deep dive on, let me know in the comments below. I've got some that I would already want to talk about anyway, but if you recommend them, that might bump them up the list a little bit. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time for whatever I'm talking about, and goodbye.